The term remains unspoken in any official capacity, absent from statements by the league, its owners, or the Players' Association. Behind closed doors, however, the discussion has already begun. A work stoppage. Not imminent, but increasingly viewed as unavoidable. More concerning than the prospect itself is what has led stakeholders to consider it inevitable. The WNBA now confronts converging pressures, financial strain, scheduling complications, and shifting institutional leverage. These did not originate with labor negotiations. Their roots trace back to a gradual realignment of viewer attention over multiple broadcast cycles. The dynamic shifted decisively when one athlete began receiving regular exposure on national platforms traditionally dedicated to the men's game. Audience attention followed disproportionately, not marginally, but substantially. Television ratings documented the trend before commentary could contextualize it. Digital metrics accelerated public awareness. Discourse moved from team-based analysis toward the individual herself, her visibility, her absence from certain contexts, and the contrast between them. This reallocation carries structural implications. In professional sports, viewership functions as currency, and currency determines leverage. League offices initially dismissed the pattern as transient, expecting natural correction. That correction never came. Corporate partners revised their inquiries accordingly, shifting focus from aggregate league performance to the projected appearances of the player in question.
Favorite part of all of that. But anyway, with the Super Bowl, a lot of people were also tuned into the Super Bowl commercials. And Nike actually announced before the Super Bowl that they would not be running any ads this year, which had Caitlin Clark fans very sad because a lot of people were thinking that maybe Nike was going to debut Caitlin Clark's signature shoe in a Super Bowl commercial. But that was not the case. WNBA fans, Caitlin Clark fans across the world were very sad about that, but it also has a lot of us wondering if Caitlin Clark's shoe is still going to be released this spring if there's not a WNBA season or if the WNBA season is stalled. Now, in today's episode, I do want to give you guys the latest update on the CBA negotiations, but the latest update that we have with Caitlin Clark and her Nike shoes is a brand new Nike Kobe 6 colorway. So as you can see, it's the blue and yellow colorway, and Caitlin Clark, I believe, posted some of these on her Instagram page, but this is all we've got so far still with Caitlin Clark's shoe. Now, you guys know my feelings. I feel like Caitlin Clark's signature shoe is well overdue. I thought it should have been released at least last season, could have been released during her rookie season, and
that inquiry unsettled the entire system. Because professional leagues thrive on centralized authority. When individual players possess enough influence to challenge that structure, it creates instability. Team owners understood this dynamic immediately. The moment Caitlin Clark appeared on NBC, viewership surged. In games where she was absent, ratings didn't crash, they just leveled off. Not a dramatic fall, but a noticeable plateau. And that distinction was troubling. It didn't signal a dying league. It signaled a league simply not being actively chosen. And being overlooked stings more than being rejected. Players sensed the shift right away. Travel conversations grew awkward. Marketing priorities were quietly recalibrated. Forecasts for future seasons began to shrink. Behind closed doors, revenue models were adjusted. Nothing was announced. Nothing was made official. But the people interpreting those numbers felt the unease. The issue wasn't a lack of funds. The issue was that the upward trajectory had stalled. And momentum is what funds salaries. Momentum drives expansion. Momentum preserves labor harmony. When progress halts, labor unrest becomes a real possibility. That's when the murmuring began. A specific date kept surfacing in discussions. The next major contract negotiation. The next reset. The next opportunity to push for structural change. Athletes started raising difficult questions.
WNBA's latest revenue share offer doesn't exceed 15%, but the league does bend on housing and facility standards. So the latest CBA proposal was submitted on Friday night, and it did not include a revenue split beyond 15%. The WNBPA had waited almost 6 weeks for a WNBA reply to its request for a 30% share of league and team revenue and a $10 million plus salary cap. Although it was believed the league had previously offered 15%, sources told Sports Business Journal it was always less than 15%, and that Friday night's offer similarly did not surpass that number. So basically, it seems like the league came back to them, changed some other things that I feel like are things that could be easily negotiated. We've talked about it in previous episodes. They changed some of those things, and they maybe budged like 1% on the revenue split. And what we've been hearing from all the players is if they do not budge on the revenue split, like that's all that they're focused on. And the players are also not going to budge. So we're getting to the point where one of them is either going to concede or they're going to strike or lock out because they're just calling one another's bluff. Basically, the players are saying, we're not budging until you give us this gross revenue split of 30%. The league is offering a net revenue split of 70%. And the league took 6 weeks to respond to this. And it doesn't seem like they changed too much. And Alexa Filippo tweeted about the changes to housing. And the WNBA's latest proposal included some
If the revenue and audience followed Caitlin Clark to NBC, what exactly is left to negotiate? That question haunted locker rooms. Players don't strike over emotions, they strike over futures. And the future just became uncertain. Some reacted with anger. Others with fear. A few started planning exits, overseas deals, media roles, independent brand work. When stability cracks, everyone protects themselves. The league tried damage control, private meetings, reassuring messages, talk of long-term vision. But vision doesn't pay bills. The real mistake wasn't losing Caitlin Clark's full attention. It was underestimating what that loss would do to leverage. Once a league shows it can't retain its biggest draw, negotiations shift. Players stop asking for patience. They demand guarantees. Guarantees require capital. Capital that stopped growing as projected. Insiders began using a new word, unsustainable. Not bankrupt, just no longer viable without conflict. That's when frustration turned to fury. Some blamed the league. Some blamed networks. Some blamed Caitlin Clark, because blaming a person is easier than blaming a system. But systems only respond to pressure. And pressure is building. Owners feel trapped. They can't admit money follows Clark. They can't say NBC has more pull than the league. But their decisions reveal it. Marketing shifts. Visibility shifts. Players notice who gets protected. Resentment becomes demands. Demands become deadlines. Deadlines become strikes. Everyone's seen this movie before. When growth stalls, when stars gain independent power, when leverage shifts, strikes follow. This isn't about Clark personally. She's just the catalyst. The fight is about who controls the future. Right now, neither the league nor NBC fully controls it. The audience does. If nothing changes, 2026 becomes the breaking point. Not because players want chaos, because they want security. And security requires money that follows them, not away.
Guess that this season is already delayed. All the reports up until now have said that if they don't get a deal done by the first week in February, the first 2 weeks in February, then the season will be delayed. And even in my chat with Annie Costable, one of the things that stood out to me most is when she said that nobody is aware of what the rules are for the expansion draft. And something else that stood out to me is when she said that the players are also pushing for different rules when it comes to core designation and those types of contracts. All of that plays into the expansion draft. Nothing is planned for that. And free agency this year, there's so much more money on the table. And that's what Annie also said in our chat. She was like, it seems like a lot of players once again are going to take on 1-year deals because the free agency season is going to be shortened. Even with this new CBA, there's going to be so much more money on the table.
That's why this feels different, not dramatic, just inevitable. A strike is coming. Not because the league failed, but because it couldn't pivot quickly enough when the center of gravity shifted. And once gravity moves, everything else eventually follows.